The land of Punt. Its location used to be in question, but today it's settled science. It's somewhere in the Horn of Africa. There is some argument to argue that some parts of the Horn of Africa could have controlled some parts of southern Arabia, but 99% of it is somewhere in the Horn of Africa. Now, the kingdoms of the land of Punt are interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because they made gold. Gold was traded with Egypt from Punt, meaning that Somalians, prior to dates that we think they had, they could trade gold. Think about what I'm saying, 2000 BC trading gold. While the trip made by Hatshepsut to the land of Punt is one of the most fascinating and well detailed visits, it's not the oldest. There's at least five older still. These older trips show that the land of Punt transformed over the times. And not only this, it shows that some of the animals that were found in the land of Punt will always be found in that region for at least 2,000 years. There are so many questions to be answered. The first one being, why would they go such a distance? The second one being, why so many repeat journeys? Why was it important for the Egyptians to go there themselves? And what exactly did they want from that region? Did they believe that there was something important? Did they call it Tanecher for the reasons that we think? Is it because they believed that that's where they came from? Is it because they believed that this place itself held religious importance as well as trade? In order to answer these questions, we will have to look at the writings and also the drawings of the land of Punt, the depictions, the animals, the people, the names, and also the DNA recoveries from the animals that have been said to come from the land of Punt. Although most boats in ancient Egypt were designed to travel over rivers, they did have the ability to travel over the sea. But it seemed like they didn't even need to do this because, of course, if this coast is in Africa, what they need to do is to find posts where they could stand before journeying again. And we at least have one person, one author, who writes of his journey to the land of Punt, taking breaks every now and then before eventually reaching the land of Punt. Now, before we go and look at him or any other person, let's first talk about one thing. A Horn of Africa itself. The thinking used to be that hunter-gatherers ruled until about 1000 BC, when Arabians came over and suddenly changed the lifestyle of these people, bringing farming and other things of that nature. But this has already been discredited many times. One, because in Lascaux we see cattle, both domesticated and wild. And not only do we see cattle, we see camels, we also see other portrayals of people organizing and standing in one place. This cave only shows one type of lifestyle, but these people did not all live in caves, as we can see with the depictions at the Kingdom of Punt. This means in Punt, there were many people who were outside of caves like these, and so these people would not be the same types of people. There are possible drawings of foundations showing houses in their squares, but also we can see right next to that human beings who are drawn as tall as the animals, but you can also see wild animals like giraffe, and you can see just below the giraffe a cow. These people are representing something very different going on right now. They're representing an Africa that has communication, possibly with South Arabia, but definitely with the ancient Egyptians. An interesting image from the Horn of Africa is this one, which portrays people holding hands, almost looking like they're swimming. It almost mimics the North African one of the Cave of Swimmers, but instead it is found in Somalia. This reading is from Thutmose III and the Queen. Sailing in the sea, beginning the goodly way towards God's land, journeying in peace to the land of Punt, by the army of the Lord of the two lands, according to the command of the Lord of gods, Amun, Lord of Thieves, presider over Karnak, in order to bring for him the marvels of every country, because he so much loves the king of Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, Makare, Hatshepsut, for his father Amun Ra, Lord of heaven, Lord of earth, more than the other kings, who have been in the land forever. So Hatshepsut had a lot of interest going to Nubia, but after going to Nubia, she headed straight for the land of Punt, of course taking the same route that every other pharaoh had taken before in order to reach this place. The others had sent people to travel for them and return with messages, but it seems like she had traveled herself, at least in one voyage. Before we interpret, I think we should read the first part, which says, Hatshepsut, who makes my beautiful monuments, who purifies the seat of the great Enid of the gods for my dwelling, as a memorial of her love. Thou art the king, taking possession of the two lands, Nemet, Amun, Hatshepsut, great in oblation, pure in food offerings. Thou satisfiest my heart at all times. I have given thee all life and satisfaction from me, all stability from me, all health from me, all joy from me. I have given to thee all lands and all countries wherein thy heart is glad. I have long intended them for thee, and the eons shall behold them until those myriads of years of usefulness which I have thought to spend. I have given to thee all Punt as far as the lands of God's lands. Now, this is where it's interesting because, of course, the ancient Egyptians, to some degree, are claiming that this land sort of belongs to them in some of their writing. And who can blame them? They believe that they are the chosen of the gods, and then they call this place God's land. So it's possible that these people are talking about people who are the same as themselves, and then saying that these people owe them or they are them in some sense. Now we know that even during Hatshepsut's time, that other people were ruling at this time because they give their names, even names like Nehesi. Now I want to first focus your mind on the first sentence, and you can see there's a word in brackets. That word is remich. That word means people, but it tends to mean Egyptian people, meaning it doesn't usually refer to anybody outside of Egypt. Now, it's important to know this so that you can interpret this phrase seriously in a good way. So, this is what it says: No one trod the myrrh terraces which the people knew not. So, no one trod the myrrh terraces which the Egyptians didn't know of. It was heard from mouth to mouth by hearsay of the ancestors. The marvels brought thence under thy fathers. The kings of the lower Egypt were brought from one to another. And since the time of the ancestors, the kings of Upper Egypt, who were of old, as a return for payments, none reaching them except thy carriers. So you can see here they're talking about how myrrh, which was taken from the land of Punt, the people of Egypt, going way before this person's time, used to talk about this place via mouth to mouth. The Egyptians used to talk about them mouth to mouth. And then what would happen is later these people would bring ornamented items from that place. And so it's already an ancient site to the ancient Egyptians by this time. So it's a mythological site by this time, meaning even though it exists, a lot of it is coming through as a legend, as a story. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because these people who are traveling to this region are not doing it only for trade. Clearly, they have a deeper thing going on about a place that exists to the south, and they put way more importance to it than any other place anywhere on earth. Perhaps another giveaway is the fact that Upper Egyptians have contact with these people. So this gives away the fact that this place is actually located in a direction where it's easier to access if you live in Upper Egypt. Maybe by land, a lot of people from Upper Egypt, let me not even say maybe. I know for a fact that by land, people from Upper Egypt could travel down south to the Sudanese areas, where some of the people who are related to these people would go all the way south, and then they would trade with people in the Horn of Africa. The inscription continues to say, "But I will cause thy army to tread them. I have led them on the water and on the land to explore the waters of inaccessible channels, and I have reached the Mur terraces. It is a glorious region of God's land. It is indeed my place of delight. I have made it for myself in order to divert my heart together with Mut Hathor Weret, mistress of Punt, the mistress great in sorcery, mistress of all gods. They took myrrh as they wished. They loaded the vessels to their heart's content, with fresh myrrh trees, every good gift of this country. Puntites, whom the people, Remish, meaning the Egyptians, know not. Southerners of God's land. I consolidated them by love." So, so of course, that's a lot to unpack here. One, you can see that there is. Let's first start with the fact that these people need to communicate somehow. And the only way that that could happen is if there is some kind of language that they can use to talk to each other. But let's start with the sentences. It is a glorious region of God's land. Remember, Punt, even though some people say it's God's land, is only a piece of God's land. God's land seems to be Sudan going down. It is indeed my place of delight. I have made it for myself in order to divert my heart together with Mut Hathor Weret, mistress of Punt. So you see there that they're already trying to put claim or lay claim on this region. And this is the important part because it's it's clear that they don't see these people as foreigners, not even as close to how they see Upper Egyptians. They took myrrh as they wished. They loaded the vessels to their heart's content with fresh myrrh trees, every good gift of this country. Puntites, whom the people know not, southerners of God's land, I consolidated them by love. Okay, so first let's read the last part where it says they took myrrh. Obviously, he's saying the Egyptians took myrrh, and he says that the Egyptians also took the trees from this country, and they also took Puntites, who the people of the land of Egypt know not. And then here's the important part because people always act like it was always East and Eastern. Southerners of God's land, I consolidated them by love. If you actually think about what is said here, she's talking about how these people are in the South and she's almost consolidated or she's almost put all these people under one banner because of her, let's just call it power, let's leave the love part out of it. Now, a lot of the products that she's talking about, we can look at them as natural resources, but also a lot of these things actually take time to get out of the trees, in this case, of myrrh. It's interesting to think that perhaps this place had always been trading this myrrh, but the middlemen were the Nubians, and so the Nubians and the Sudanese in general would have taken it through, and this way the ancient Egyptians could have direct access to the myrrh terraces, as she says. Now, of course, a small boat like this would not make such a journey possible, but instead you need something much bigger. And we see this in Deir al-Bahari, portrayed by Hatshepsut's people. If you can't see properly, what you're staring at is a giant ship with hundreds of people, which has possibly sails. As I said, this land was already ancient to the ancient Egyptians, even though it is at the time of Hatshepsut that we get the most amount of information. Now, remember, there's two things here that are important. Gold and myrrh are being brought through this land. And this land is being portrayed with two things. So, what shall we start with? Let's start with the fact that gold is has to be collected in order for it to be traded. So we see some genuine interest or original interest in gold by people located in this coast in the Horn of Africa. And also we see some very important things. Now, the boats, which are large, are they represent something that the ancient Egyptians used to do with their carts. See, when the carts came from Asia into the areas of Egypt, what they used to do was they used to do to assemble them and then disassemble them. And they also did this with the ships. This was an important piece of this because it means that they didn't have to have this giant ship which they park at shore and then they have to like go back and then they have to instead they could walk on land with these multiple small pieces being carried by the people, the soldiers that came with her, and then it can be put back together again when they get back into the ocean and head towards Punt. How exactly they knew and what maps they used in order to know, okay, now we've reached Punt, I have no idea. But they did draw pictures, they did have writing, and they did say that they got gold and myrrh from this place. And of course, there were so many other things that they traded. One of them resulting in the genes being found of animals in Egypt today. And this is where it it to almost all the scientists they go, okay, so it must have been located somewhere in the Horn of Africa because the animals that have been genetically tested all come from that region. Now, one thing that people also don't disagree about is that the ancient Egyptians say they come from this place. This is one of the reasons why some people wanted this place to be somewhere in Arabia, because if they say they come from this place, then that is part of the evidences that are put into the theory that ancient Egyptians were like other Africans. Keep in mind, this is not something that they're unaware of. They're aware that the people of Punt look different than the people of Asia. For them to say that we come from this place, and this place, as we know, has had Africans for the longest time. We're talking about 1400 BC here. We're not talking about a time when Asiatics were a big population anywhere near the Horn of Africa. And also, because they say it's where they came from, we're probably talking about 2400 BC because it goes back. It actually goes back probably pre-dynastically, this connection between the land of Punt and ancient Egypt. And of course, why would I say that? Well, it's in the sentence when they say that it's the land of their ancestors, the land where their ancestors came from. Well, came from means where they arrived from. Studies predating the one that I'm about to talk about had already shown that the people from Egypt lacked a certain type of primate which is found all over Egypt. So it does not happen in there naturally. But we see it from the time of Narmer, meaning that the people of Punt must have been communicating even with pre dynastic Egypt. So someone must remind me to link the study because I can link it even if I've already uploaded the video. Egyptian iconography of Papio Hamadras, a tradition exceeding 3,000 years, statuette inscribed with the name of King Narmer, early dynastic period, first dynasty, 3150, 3100 BC, reproduced with permission from the museum, blah, blah, blah. As you can see here, they're describing all these baboons and they're saying that these primates that are being depicted here from starting from Norma, even going to Tutankhamun, all of these different depictions, they're all a sign of the land of Punt because this animal is not naturally found in this region. Now remember, like I said, the people of Sudan could have easily traded with these people. So these animals could have started from the Horn of Africa, moved through Sudan, and then landed in Egypt. So it's not necessarily that they always had to travel directly to that region in order to get these animals. Depicted here is the distribution of these animals, and as you can see, certain animals are found in certain areas, and they're trying to make the case here that you cannot use Egypt as a pure place for where these animals would come from. As you can see, the arrows pointing. And if we read the study, Egypt lies well beyond the distribution of the P. anubis and the P. hamadryas, and there is no evidence of natural population in Egypt during antiquity. The remains of baboons in Egypt are therefore interpreted as evidence of foreign trade. This figure puts the present study specimen, those numbers, and those of Saqqara into context by illustration. Spatial-temporal variation in the preservation of the baboons, emphasizing differences in taxonomy, wrapping and deposition, burial tombs and catacombs. Horizontal bars represent the temporal spans of baboon bearing archaeological sites and known expedition to Punt. Every New Kingdom specimen of P. hamadra is contemporaneous with expeditions to Punt. Figure 2 continued on the next page. So you can see here, they're just admitting right there that there is no way that these animals come from this area. And also, they also line up in size with Punt. So when there's an expedition, there's an access or there's excess of these animals being distributed in the region, meaning that there is almost 100% proof that the land of Punt has to be in the Horn of Africa. Here's a heat map making their point, emphasizing it to the highest end. Spatial estimations of isotope ratios and their differences from target values using empirical Bayesian Kriging specimens, locations of modern baboons, and the normalized difference values for D18 against our target tissue, the hair, specimen location of the modern baboon, black points, source appendix 1, table 2, and the normalized difference values for 87 SR, 86 SR ratios against our target tissues, the enamel of EA, that number, the combined normalized difference of both isotope ratios against both targets tissues. The black line bounds the area within some points in panel. So you can see here where the black line is. So look at the third image. So right under the word view publication, you look at the third image, you see there's that black outline. That's almost where they limit part of these animals where they would be found from. If you can't tell, this is the Horn of Africa, and this makes a huge difference in the history of ancient Egypt and how we look at the way that they traveled and moved and communicated. And it also gives a lot of leeway to the idea that Southern Arabians had access to some parts of the Horn of Africa, and the people from the Horn of Africa had access to that region, meaning that when we talk about the Yemenite kingdoms, that we must be looking at it from a point of view. And this is why I've shown you all those rock engravings showing African animals or things from Africa that were not common in those regions, but you can see depictions of them, probably through trade with Africans. Now, since we're already talking about these baboons, I think it's important that I add the mummy of the baboon. As you can see, it's well preserved. But there's a couple things about it that we need to talk about. One, of course, that this baboon is very well preserved, but not only that, it has this ruddy look to it. You ever notice that a lot of people that take mummies and say, oh, they must be European because of their look? Well, look how this obvious baboon that is not this color naturally looks. But not only that, let's look at its hair. Now, I don't know about you, but this looks almost 100% similar to those other mummies that we find all over Egypt, which people say they must have had blonde hair, but you can see here that this baboon's hair has changed color. It's become blonde. Well, how is that possible? Well, if it was up to the people who like to pretend like everything just changes is like based on the reality, then we have to assume that monkeys or baboons from Africa in the past were blonde. So they traded blonde monkeys all the way down to this place, which is hilarious. But in real life, we know that this happens through years and years of something sitting under the ground or in a room, mummified. The color starts getting extracted, removed, oxidization, so many things that are playing a role. It's hilarious that I have to show this, by the way, because why? Why do I have to show this? Why can't people just understand that with humans that it's impossible to have blonde people in ancient Egypt, and instead it was this as a result of this. But let's not dwell too long on that. Here is a depiction, one showing Asiatics at the bottom. These Asiatics are bringing in treasures from their lands, and at the top they're showing Puntites. And as you can see, some of them are dressed like Egyptians, especially the ones at the front. Their skin color is depicted as highly dark, and two of them are seen with a skin color that almost looks much lighter than the others, but that, as you can see, that's the chipping away of the color. The one holding the giraffe is probably the lightest one of the few, and everyone else is basically very, very dark. This means that these people, the people of Egypt, were very aware of what the people of the land of Punt look like. So, why would they say that these people, by the way, let's first pause a second. Okay, so these people are the people from the land of Punt, and they bring these things there. This sort of removes any question that it's from Africa, but it also removes the idea that it's from this Saudi Arabian, Yemeni area place because, people don't really look like that over there, except, of course, if you're saying that they do, which means that there were Africans located in those regions, which they're not going to accept because that's going to expand the empire of Africans to be larger, but that's another story. So we can continue. And like I said, there's a giraffe, African, cheetahs, African, all of these things that they're bringing African. And the interesting part is that a lot of these people actually went to Egypt themselves. So they were taken to Egypt themselves. And again, it's interesting that they say that these are the people that we came from. They know they're dark skinned, they know they're black, they know they're in Africa, they know they're deep in that region. And then if we square that with the fact that Herodotus said that the practices of ancient Egypt clearly come from other Africans. It seems like the ancient Egyptians are not just saying this as a statement. I mean, it seems like we could dismiss it as just like, oh, they were just saying that. There were dumb Egyptians in the past, and the dumb Egyptians were just saying stuff in the past because it sounded cool. Yeah, they came from the mythological land of Punt. Isn't that crazy? But in real life, what they probably meant was based on everything we know, we probably came from this direction. And based on how well documented the ancient Egyptians are and how well they know things back in the day, I don't think they would just say that as a flippant statement. And then of course you can take the fact that they put in so much money in order to go to these areas. As one Egyptologist said, you can see the direction that Punt is because the people at the top, though most of them be Puntites, it seems like the items they bring are mixed up with that of the Nubians, meaning that it's taken as a whole Southerners thing. So, in other words, it's not just a thing where we can say, oh, there is no connection between Nubia and the people of Punt. It seems like there's a strong connection between these people. Clothing and animals. So let's first look at what we can find in the Horn of Africa. What we see here is a cow, obviously. Everything about this is a cow. It's depicted in a strange way, but let me try and break it down for you. It looks random a little bit, right? But let's look at the cow's neck. Does that color sort of look somewhat similar to you? Does it not remind you of the Pangrave things where it's red, black, red, black, red, black, and in this case, red, black, and white? Does it not remind you of those colors? But let's leave that for a while because that's speculation. But let's go down to the person who is depicted right under the cow. Seen under the cow, you see a person dressed in a curious top, and I don't know what that is, but a very curious top, and his arms are spread wide. This is probably a praise position, but it's probably also a depiction of a dance where someone is spreading their arms wide like cattle. It is very interesting to see this early because these were built around about 4000 BC. Even if we didn't have that information from the land itself, we have ancient Egyptians to thank for depicting the fact that there were cattle in those areas. For example, let's read marvels brought to His Majesty in the land of Punt in the year dried myrrh, Heket, gold, Deben, Kiddet, slaves, males and females, oxen and calves, bulls, total cattle, 419 total cattle, besides vessels laden with ivory, ebony skins of the panther, every good thing of this country. So what I wanted to focus there was the actual items rather than the number. Obviously, you can see there's the number because it's actually well depicted. It's well written in ancient Egypt how many things they got. So if we read it again, but this time let's not skip the numbers. It says dried myrrh, 1,685. Heket gold, which they don't know the number, 155 Deben, 2 Kiddet, 134 slaves, 114 oxen and calves, 305 bulls, total 419 cattle, besides laden and ivory, ebony, or of the panther, every good thing of this country. So what you can see there is cattle as early as this. If you accept that the land of Punt is in the Horn of Africa, then you accept that there were cattle going back 1400 BC. Again, a lot of these ideas, which were accepted by some people in the past, are now coming together perfectly. Being able to capture this many cattle from this one region is kind of crazy. In some of my previous videos, I showed how people used to praise. So these are like prayer hands in ancient Egypt before prayer hands became putting your hands together. It's lifting them up in the sky like this. The Zulus and almost everybody in Africa does this. And as you can see there, there's a glorification in the bottom of someone lifting their hands. Now, I want to speak to this idea of Saudi Arabia being the homeland of this place. Now, remember, Saudi Arabia is not in the historical record in ancient Egypt in any way, shape, or form. The idea that Oman, Yemen, or any of these places has pretty much been dismissed by all historians, especially those who have seen the genetic evidence. It means that Saudi Arabia, even though it was a great place, is only mentioned with a few people coming in, which are called Bedouins at the time. Well, not at the time, later. They're called Bedouins. These are the people from the Asiatic regions who are a newcomer, in a sense, probably representing a kingdom within Saudi Arabia that grew. And then they saw the results in Egypt with people coming in, a small amount of people. And remember, I read the whole thing about Arabs and the history of the Arabs and all of that. That's where their history goes, but it does not go in the direction where they delete anything about Punt or anything like that. And so the ideas of the Arabs being the founders of the ancient Egyptians, all of that is nonsense. Now, keep in mind that there are other things that come from the land of Punt that are important. For example, if you notice, this person in their hand has got a stick, but this isn't any stick, it's actually a boomerang. And boomerangs have been found in ancient Egypt, just like they've been found in Australia. And some of them have been tested, and they actually do have the ability to return to the owner, just like the boomerangs found in the Australian regions. These are believed to come from the kingdom of Punt. Why? Well, one of the things that's written down by the ancient Egyptians as something that they traded is a throwing stick. Now, if it's just a normal stick, you don't need to trade with it because that would be a waste of space. But as you can see, listed in under the tree, so we look down, go past God's land, king, by the trees. Under the trees, we see that some of the things that are traded with the ancient Egyptians are from the land of Punt are electrum, eye cosmetics, a throw sticks of the Puntites. That's a very important part. Throw sticks of the Puntites, meaning that these boomerangs that come from this specific area are of the Puntites. And that tells us more about the people living in that region and what exactly they were doing. Now, let's finish with Hatshepsut for 1 second. So, blah, 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 kissing the earth of Hatshepsut by the chiefs of Punt, the Nubian troglodytes, these are the people to the west, of Kentum, Nofer, every country, and then it lists the countries, doing obeisance with bowed head, bearing their tribute to the place where Her Majesty is located, ways not trodden by others. Every country is dominion of Her Majesty and counted Lord of Thebes as tribute each year, which her father Amun for her appointed for her who hath set all the lands beneath her sandals, living forever. They say as okay, so this is over the chiefs of Punt. They say as they pray for peace from Her Majesty, hail to thee, King of Egypt, Ra, who shines like the sun, your sovereign mistress of heaven. Thy name reaches as far as the circuit of heaven. The fame of Makeri, Hatshepsut, encircles the sea. Now, it's important to understand that we have a language problem here. What language were the people in this area speaking? If you believe the African spread of the Afro-Asiatic language, then they must have been speaking a Kushite language. But in order for the ancient Egyptians to understand it, Kushite wouldn't help either. So it might have been a Nubian language in which was translated to Hatshepsut and the others, so a Sudanic language that is similar. Or they might have just trained some people to speak ancient Egyptian so they could understand them. Because, of course, what you see now is names being listed which are missing here, but there are names of actual people and actual tribes and names, and they are thought to be the exact names of the tribes as described by the people, because there are not just one journey to this region, but there are multiple. I have spent the entire time of this video depicting Hatshepsut going to those locations, but there has to be at least 3 more videos of this type that depicts what the others did, namely Mentuhotep III, who was at least 500 years before her, and Amenhotep III. Both of these people also took trips to that region. And remember, I told you that it's not always the exact same thing they find there. Obviously, myrrh there, gold there, but there are other things that we can find. And of course, what the most important thing here is not that Egypt had communication with deep parts of Africa. The most important thing is that Egypt is now basically drawing what East Africa would have looked like. And if we couple this with the information that we already have about East Africa, especially about Motaman, who was who we were able to genetically test, showing that 4,000 years ago, the area of East Africa was mainly untouched by anyone outside of the region, including people who would be in North Africa, it shows that the history of this region is probably more mysterious than we think. I think it was because DNA became very popular in 2016. When this was discovered, it became world news. It says the Petrus bone. Ancient genomes have been sequenced from around the world, but Africa has proved difficult because hot and humid conditions can destroy fragile DNA. However, the 4,500-year-old remains of a hunter-gatherer known as Motaman were found in the cave and were well preserved. Importantly, a bone situated just below the ear, called the Petrus bone, was intact. Dr. Manika, speaking to Science in Action on the BBC World Service, said the Petrus bone is really hard and does a really good job of preventing bacteria getting in and degrading the DNA. What we are able to get is some very high quality, undamaged DNA from which we could reconstruct the whole genome of the individual. We have the complete blueprint, every single gene, every single bit of information that made this individual that lived 4,500 years ago in Ethiopia. 4,500 years ago is 2,500 BC, and it's about the same time that we see that Lost Gil thing where we start to see cattle and all that other stuff being portrayed. So let's see what they said about the DNA. The genome revealed that Motorman had purely African DNA. His ancestors had never moved from Africa, but the comparison of this with modern African genomes highlighted that about 1,500 years after his death, the makeup of the continent had changed. Genetic studies have shown that after the Great Migration out of Africa, which happened about 60,000 years ago, some people later returned to the continent. But this study shows that about 3,000 years ago, there was a much larger migration than had been thought. So the representation that today reflects the mixing of the Ethiopians means that that migration must have been huge. Otherwise, it must have started early in dribs, but it didn't start early because we can see here, because of Motorman, a pure African DNA, which is not really that replicated today everywhere. Now, the only reason why I'm emphasizing this is so that we can get this idea out of the way that, okay, maybe the people of Punt were Asians or something like that. Maybe people living in the Horn of Africa were Asians. They were not. They were not. And it's only really when you start going about 500 BC that you start seeing them moving in large numbers, meaning the combination of two empires, the one in Yemen and the one in the Horn of Africa. Now, I don't believe that the Horn of Africa and Horn of Africa and Asia have completely been separate forever. I think the boats that have been found and everything means that they could easily travel. And if you look at the gap in between Yemen and the African areas, it would take one curious person to cross it.